What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celios Network. We're about halfway through March, and Salt Lake City Regionals is coming up, and then we have some other regionals down the line as well. So I wanted to do another installment of the best decks in Brilliant Stars for the Pokemon trading card game. And we're going to look at a bunch of statistics today and really get down to what decks are performing well, how different are their performances from other decks, and talk about some of the lists and everything too. So before we get into that though, shout out to PotonStore.com, the best place to get PTCGO codes. Use code CELIO for 5% off, and also CardCheaperGames.com, where you can find physical Pokemon TCG product and use code CELIO for 5% off. You can share and view deck lists over at PokemonCard.io, and check out the Beast Coast Pokemon YouTube channel that I'm a part of. Links for everything are down there in the description. So in this video, we will be pulling results from the 5 events on play.limitlesstcg.com that have had more than 200 players in the Brilliant Stars format. I am aware there have been IRL events happening, unofficial 1K and 2K events, as well as the Brisbane Regionals. We'll talk about that on the channel this week, but I wanted to use strictly online event results so that all the results are uniform with each other and we can combine them for some cool data to look at. I also want to point out that as far as online events go, the Metaphy Regionals $2,000 event is the closest thing in this list to a real regional. It was a day 1 9-round best 2 out of 3 event, and then day 2 best 2 out of 3 5 rounds, and then cut to a top 8. It was ran just like a regional would be, except, online open deck lists. So other than that, very close to a real simulated regionals. So I am going to do a little bit of extra data analysis on those results in this video. So this is the combined data from those 5 Brilliant Stars online events, starting on the left and then continuing down on the right. So we'll see here that I'm looking at the frequency of day 2s or phase 2s that the archetypes have gotten, how many top 8s, and how many wins. Now the wins category is a little low since we're only looking at 5 events, so there's only 5 winners, but I figured I'd toss that in there just in case people were curious. So we can see, Mew Genesect far and away the number 1 with 51 day 2 placements, 16 top 8 placements, and so on. So if you want to look at all this data here, feel free to pause the video and take a look at all of it yourself. This isn't really the interesting stuff. We're going to get into the interesting stuff, but this lays down the groundwork for it. The Hoopamult decks are listed on Play Limitless as Dark Box or Hoopamult Trace. Sometimes they're even listed as Other if the algorithm doesn't pick up because of all the different combinations of cards. I just combine them into one deck, being Hoopamult. Ice Rider also includes Ice Rider with Arceus in it. And then there's the Arceus variants miscellaneous. Those we won't be looking at as deeply in the data, since those are just kind of general random rogue, whatever you want to call it, variants of decks that just happen to have Arceus in them as well. So I made a little bit of a point system here, where a day 2 or a phase 2 from a deck equals 1 point, and a top 8 equals 1.5 points, and a first place equals 2 points. Now you can look at that data I just listed and kind of go about it however way you want. But I thought this was just like a fine little way to give to assign points to each placement and kind of continue looking deeper into it. So on that previous slide, we had day 2's top 8's wins, and this we're kind of condensing it down into just one score. And then if we don't include Arceus variants miscellaneous, Gengar pops up from number 11 to number 10. You'll see that there on the bottom right. So this is still taken from those 5 largest events that we looked at. And we're seeing that Mew Genesect, now the score numbers are arbitrary because you can assign, a day 2 equals 5 points and a first place equals 20. And then these points are going to look completely different. It's just to represent a ranking of the decks. So Mew Genesect being in the top, and that score is making it look like it's way ahead. And then everything else is much closer to each other after that. Now, what's interesting about this is a lot of people are playing Mew Genesect. That's not to say a lot of people aren't playing these other decks, because they are, but a lot of people are playing Mew Genesect. So, if you were to take how many people played Mew to these 5 events, and how many people played Arceus Duraludon to these 5 events, how would those scores average out? Does it make sense that Mew earned that many points in Arceus Duraludon? Is it overperforming or underperforming? Let's find out. So if we look at it like that, 322 people piloted Mew Genesect to these 5 events, and 98 piloted Arceus Duraludon. More than 3 times the amount of Arceus Duraludon, more than 3 times Arceus Duraludon were Mew players. So when you look at that, and you take into account, you know, Arceus Duraludon has this score of 27.5 according to its placements, and Mew Genesect has 81, astronomically above Arceus Duraludon. But when you look and see, wait, Mew Genesect had more than 3 times the amount of frequency in these events. If you average the number played to the score that I've given it, it turns out Arceus Duraludon's actually performing just a little teeny bit better than Mew Genesect. And so that's something to keep in mind. And again, these scores are arbitrary. It's to get you guys thinking and looking at these deck performances and the statistics a little bit differently. And so I've written it out here. If 100 people play deck 1, let's call that Mew VMAX, and 20 of them make day 2. And 50 people play deck 2, let's call that Arceus Duraludon, and 10 of them make day 2. So you see a top 64 with 20 Mew and 10 Duraludon, and think, wow, Mew did so much better than Duraludon. Look at how many more Mews are in top cut. At face value, it will look like deck 1 was more successful. But if 100 people played deck 1 and 20 of them made day 2, that had a 20% conversion rate, or 20% conversion rate. And then you look at 50 people playing deck 2 and 10 of them make day 2, that's still a 20% conversion rate. So 1 out of 5 people who played both decks 1 and decks 2 made day 2 with it. Now this is a hypothetical scenario, but when you look at things like this, basically Mew Genesect and Arceus Duraludon are not statistically significantly different from each other in their success rates in these 5 events, if you look at it that way. Because Arceus Duraludon, had enough day 2 top 8 first place placements to give it the score of 27.5. Mew Genesect had enough to give it the score of 81. But when you factor in how many chances did these decks actually have, 98 Arceus Duraludons existed in these events, and 322 Mew Genesects existed in these events, it's only fair to average the scores and then see they're actually basically not different from each other much at all. So take this into account. People are going to say, oh, but so many Mew Genesects made day 2, so many Mew Genesects are cutting events online. Yeah, but also so many people are playing Mew Genesect. So what I'm trying to say here, do I think Mew Genesect's not good? No, of course not. Mew Genesect is busted, but it is not performing, at least in these 5 events. It's actually performing slightly less better on average than Arceus Duraludon, a deck that is seen to be, number 2 or number 3 to Mew VMAX. No questions asked, Mew VMAX best deck in format, but here actually it's getting a little bit of an underperforming score when you compare it to the second best deck. So I wanted to show you guys that, because I'm sure there will be people, that go buy Mew Genesect and then take it to a regional and then go like 5-4. They don't make day 2. They're upset because they just bought the best deck. They played the best deck. They didn't make day 2. Nothing's a sure thing. And when more people play a deck, of course, if it's a good deck, there will be a better chance for more players to make day 2 with it. But there's also all of those players not making day 2 with it, or not cutting, or not getting championship points, however you want to see it. So ask questions about this in the comments down below if there's anything I could explain better, but I really love talking about this stuff. So let's move on. Here we have just the data from the Metaphy Regionals, because like I said, I think this was really well run. The structure was simulating a regionals event to the T outside of closed/open deck list, which online is just done to prevent cheating. And the important thing I really want to look at here is the day 2 conversion rate. This is how many if X amount of players played a deck, how many of those players made it into day 2 or top cut, or however you want to look at it. So 90 players played Mew Genesect and 12 made day 2. Mew Genesect was the most popular deck in day 2. Wow, it must have performed so well. It had a 13% conversion rate. Arceus and Teleon, only 8 in day 2. Boo, hiss. But it had a 22.86 conversion rate. We'll round it up and say 23% conversion rate for Arceus and Teleon. And then General Arceus variants actually tied Mew with a 13.33. Just under it are Hoopamolten and Arceus Duraludon in the 11% range. Everything under the thick black line there in the middle of the sheet, I am not considering statistically significant, because they had less than 10 people even playing the deck to day 1. So, you know, like Arceus Malamar VMAX, 40% day 2 conversion rate. It's not really statistically significant. Only 5 people played it. You know, if it got its numbers up to like 15, 20, and it was still getting a 40% day 2 conversion rate, that would be insane, and that would be something to look into. But we're mostly looking at everything above that black line. Mew Genesect, here's a prime example of what we were talking about on the previous slide. Mew Genesect had the most day 2 share, but it actually wasn't the most successful on average. Arceus and Teleon had the strongest day 2 conversion rate out of the larger sample sizes. It had almost a third of the players that Mew Genesect had, and it had 2/3 of the day 2 share. So naturally, it has a higher day 2 conversion rate because of that. And we also have the win rates, the percentage of the day 1 share. So 25% of the field was Mew Genesect on day 1. And a little less than 10% was Arceus and Teleon, being the second most popular. So once again, combined data from 5 largest Brilliant Stars Online events. We're getting into the deck list portion of the video now, counting down the top 10 decks, and we will be using the bottom right chart that you see there. We are omitting the Arceus variants miscellaneous and bumping Gengar up into 10th place. So, starting with number 10, we've got Gengar VMAX. Now, we're going to briefly cover these, and I will be covering a bunch more stuff on the channel this week leading up to St. Louis. Salt Lake City. I've been calling it St. Louis, and I hopefully that will be the last time. But leading up to Salt Lake City, we will be looking at decks and lists and the metagame in a bunch of different ways. Let's just briefly look at these lists from high placements in these events that we talked about, and I'll also give my opinion a little bit on the decks. So Gengar VMAX, it's good because hitting into Mew VMAX, it has high HP. It's also good hitting into any kind of deck that wants to tank damage, like straight Arceus and Teleon. It's pretty good into that. It got a buff with Brilliant Stars because of Choice Belt. A lot of lists are playing the Bieberol as kind of a draw engine, so you don't have to rely on Crobat, but that does take away from the early turn consistency because Crobat gets you cards right away, whereas you have to wait to evolve up into Bieberol. Gengar VMAX seems insane on paper because, okay, let's see. We're going to beat Mew VMAX, you know, sometimes, because Mew VMAX is very, very good and it beats its bad matchups frequently. And then we're going to be good against Arceus and Teleon, the second most popular deck. And hey, we even stand a chance versus Duraludon VMAX on paper. But when we're trying to set up an evolved Pokemon as our main attacker, and then multiple evolved Pokemon to get energy on our main attacker, and then another evolved Pokemon to draw cards, and we're not playing that many supporters, and we're playing some cards that are dead later on, like Battle VIP Pass, cards that don't help us early, like Urn of Vitality. The deck has consistency issues. On paper, the matchups look great, but the consistency issues are what keeps it down to being number 10 on our list today. Next up is number 9, Durant. Staying true to the statistics and the data, Durant is here. It won like a 300 person online event. I don't think that will be happening anymore. I think this is an anomaly. Players were probably not prepared to play against Durant. I'm sure it got some wins that it shouldn't have because of players playing poorly, because not even realizing Durant was on the radar. Not to discount this player's accomplishment, but I don't think Durant will be making these kind of performances again in large events. But it's here as the 9th place deck for now, according to the data we're using. So here we go. Durant is a mill deck. You're just going to try to boss up your opponent's Pokemon, trap them up there with Galar Mine. You can Echoing Horn something bulky to the bench, and then you just use Devour, hopefully until your opponent has no deck left. I wouldn't play this deck personally to an important event. I think it's a little memey. It does have some legs. Well, Durant has like what, 6 legs because it's an ant, but it has legs. And it's like, I guess if you play it well and you don't hit a lot of really poor matchups, it can do fine getting into day 2, but I don't think it's going to beat a lot of day 2 players. Like once you get into the players who like know their game theory and understand what to do against X, Y, or Z type of deck, I don't think Durant's going to get many people. Number 8, Rapidstrike Malamar. We have a list here from Tord Reklev, playing the Teleon variant of Malamar. A lot of people do like the Cinccino variant as well, but I've shown the Cinccino variant on the channel, so I figured we'd show off an Teleon list today for the deck. I think this might be the best single prize deck in my opinion. It's not on the list today. It's number 8, and we have another single prize deck above it. But I think this might be the best single prize deck in the format. It seems like it would be inconsistent at doing what it's trying to do, but it's really not. It gets those huge 300 damage plus knockouts more often than you might think on paper. It got a buff from Cynthia's Ambition. Yeah, I think this deck is pretty good. It does have the early turn setup issues sometimes, but once you get your board established, the deck flows. You get whatever you need because of your Scoop Up Nets and Shady Dealings, your Octillery's Rapid Strike Search, and then you're only giving up 1 prize card. The deck does suffer against Jolteon VMAX, but Jolteon VMAX has been very, very unpopular. So I don't think that's something that necessarily people need to worry about teching for, because like there were 6 of it in the Metaphy Regionals, and a Jolteon ended up winning the whole event, but only 6 out of 358 players played the deck, so most people did not have to deal with Jolteon. Hey, look at that. Next up is Jolteon. This is the list that won the Metaphy Regionals. This is really similar to the list that I was playing, except they cut the Ultra Ball for a 3rd Elemental badge. For Marnie, for Path to the Peak is definitely the way to go with the deck. You just try to disrupt your opponent with those 2 cards, and then spread 100 and 100 a couple of times, and before you know it, you're taking all of your prizes. If people don't tech Manaphy into their single prize decks like Hoopamolt and Rapidstrike Malamar, you get really easy wins in those matchups. Jolteon typically goes about 50-50 to Mew, but I kind of just give Mew like 5 or 10% in every matchup that I wouldn't normally give it. So let's say it goes like 40-60 to Mew, because Mew VMAX is so consistent, it bursts out so much damage. But I'm a fan of Jolteon VMAX myself. Love to see it still performing well. Next we have at number 6, Dark Box, Hoopamolt, whatever you want to call it. This is a list with Galarian Weezing in it, but the mainstays are typically the Inteleon line, the Galarian Moltres, Hoopa, Sable IV, and then some sort of free retreat Pokemon to pivot. But I really like this list. It's teched out to give you kind of a higher potential with the Weezing, and then you have the water energy, so you can attack with Shady Dealings and Teleon if you want, or with Castform Rainy Form to do 20 everywhere. It has 1 fighting energy plus Galarian Zapdos V, and that could be really good in closed deck list in an IRL environment where your opponent doesn't know your whole deck list. The Galarian Zapdos Vs are really good in that scenario. I do think that good Mew VMAX players, or people that have studied the matchup, I should say, they have routes to beat this deck. Or Choreo gives you a problem because your Hoopa doesn't one-shot Meloetta, but the Galarian Weezing variant can give just about anything issues because your opponent doesn't have abilities. So I do think the Galarian Weezing can cause this deck to win games that it had no business winning. And it can also just like make skill kind of not matter, because if you go Marnie, Galarian Weezing and your opponent says pass, then you can beat anybody if Galarian Weezing screws your opponent up. So I do think this is a deck that has potential. The Galarian Weezing makes it less consistent. It's been performing well, obviously, either the Galarian Weezing variant or the non-Galarian Weezing variant. I'd expect to see this deck being played at regional events. Maybe not top 8ing, but definitely getting some day 2s. Number 5 is Ice Rider. Now, Ice Rider was doing much better in the earlier tournaments than it is doing now. We have a list here without Arceus V-Star, which is the way that most people have decided to be playing it now. Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX got a nice buff from Choice Belt being released, because now you can Choice Belt plus Leon, and that means Max Lance does a maximum of 310 damage, which just so happens to be how much damage you need to do to knock out a Mew VMAX in one hit. Ice Rider plays Path of the Peak, it plays Marnie. Some of them play Fan of Waves, some of them play Crushing Hammers, so it does have some disruption in the deck. At least the Marnie plus Path of the Peak, and a lot of times these opposing VMAX decks are going to try to do that Marnie Path to the Peak play or something of the nature to Mew VMAX to try to get like that extra turn that they need. Because a deck like Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX doesn't rely on abilities like Mew VMAX does. A deck like Jolteon VMAX doesn't rely on abilities like Mew VMAX does. So these decks try to get like a free turn, so to speak, out of Marnie Path and things of that nature, so that then they can kind of even out the game. Because of Mew's incredible speed and inherent power. So I think Ice Rider will probably be falling down the list as weeks go on. But right now it's number 5. Number 4, Arceus and Teleon. I think Ice Rider will be going down, but I think Arceus and Teleon will be going up, because it has just started to see like its kind of its hot streak. And here we have a list from the Metaphy event. So Arceus and Teleon focuses on building the Arceus V-Star to be 310 HP with the Big Charm. You play Charon's Care once or twice and heal those attacks. And really, if you can heal an opponent's attack once and at twice, you're basically deleting turns from your opponent. If they're swinging like 250 damage into an Arceus and you just say Charon's Care, set up the new one, Trinity Nova 180, it's like your opponent's turn didn't happen almost in some cases. So this deck is strong because of that, and it also does have skill expression with all of the searching going on. You've got your Starburst searching, you have Trinity Nova giving you decisions on where to attach or if to attach. You have many different supporters to use, whether that's going to be Boss to be aggressive, Marnie to be disruptive, Sharon to heal your board. And then you've also got Path to the Peak. I do think the list I played in the Metaphy event gives you more options and gives you more potential to outplay your opponent and kind of bully them in the early game. But I figured I show my lists on here all the time, so I wanted to show some other players and community members in the video. Arceus and Teleon is a deck I would definitely expect to see if you're going to Salt Lake City. You're going to play against this in Swiss. Next is Arceus with the birds / toolbox, whatever you want to call it. It's performing really, really well. Jason, actually, I think he's top 8'd like 3 or 4 different events with this list that he's been working on. I'm not sure if he's changed the list between events, but he's been doing really well with it. And it's a lot different than other people's lists. He plays a 3-2 Arceus and only 2 double turbos. and then a multitude of tech attackers, including Galarian Moltres V, Galarian Zapdos V, the Baby Moltres, and Zamazenta V. This is a toolbox style deck. It tries to have answers to a lot of different scenarios and other popular archetypes to be kind of a counter strategy, just trying to beat everything else around it. So I do think this is a hard deck to play, and I mentioned that last week as well. Especially the more techs and tools you add to a deck like this, the harder it becomes to play. So keep that in mind. This isn't a deck that I think you should pick up and play tomorrow at an important tournament. Um, but I think it's a deck with a high reward for playing well. It just doesn't really surpass Mew VMAX when Mew VMAX gets lucky. That's kind of the thing. These decks that take skill, you can kind of meet Mew VMAX where it's at sometimes, but Mew VMAX can kind of always go over the ceiling of every other deck just by having so much at its disposal between Fusion Strike Energy, Alessa, Meloetta, Genesect V, Power Tablet, Choice Belt, etc. This is a great deck. I think this might fall down a little bit when Arceus and Teleon goes up and probably surpasses it. Number 2, we've got Arceus Duraludon. I think when this metagame kind of settles, maybe in a few weeks or a month, Arceus Duraludon might be like number 2 or number 3, and the Arceus variants will shuffle around a little bit. But Arceus Duraludon came out of the gate swinging for the Brilliant Stars format. I like the lists that are experimenting with the stadiums a little more. Not sure on the optimal count, so that's why I'm showing off a list that's experimenting with a couple different stadiums, but still playing the core of the deck being the 4-2 Arceus 2-3 Duraludon with the single strike mustard. Now, Arceus Duraludon is suffering because Mew VMAX is now playing Echoing Horn, and Mew VMAX has become even more insane because of it. And they can just never hit a Duraludon VMAX because they can escape rope into your first Duraludon, then knock out an Arceus, then Echoing Horn boss Duraludon or Arceus again, and that's the game. So Arceus Duraludon does not like that Mew VMAX has a plan for it, and I don't think Arceus Duraludon ever has a chance at surpassing Mew VMAX's best deck in format for that reason. Now let's go into the best deck in format, Mew VMAX, of course it is. So Mew VMAX here playing no basic energy, and people are like, how does that beat Duraludon then? Echoing Horn. And Mew VMAX just being pretty darn disgusting. So Mew VMAX, I feel like there's really not much for me to say about it. Like I said, we're going to be doing standard format Salt Lake City focused content all week on the channel, so naturally we're going to be talking about Mew VMAX. Mew VMAX has everything going for it. It has dark weakness, sure, but you have a single prize basic attacker in Meloetta. You have damage reduction from Oricorio. You have healing from copying the Psychic Leap from Mew V. You have energy acceleration from Alessa, and you even have double turbo that allows you to attack with a single attachment. This deck is consistent. It hits hard. It can one-shot literally anything, even if it's only one time. It can one-shot Vs on turn 1 going second. It can essentially gush you on turn 1 going second because of Escape Rope, and some lists play Catcher. Mew VMAX has it all. It's been, succeeding at the highest level so far. We'll look at more results from IRL tournaments with Mew VMAX included tomorrow. But yeah, Mew VMAX is number 1, and I can't see that changing in the Brilliant Stars format. So there you have it, the best decks currently. We're in the middle of March right now when I'm recording this video. Leave it in the comments down below if I missed a deck, you think I forgot something, you hate how I did my statistics, you love how I did my statistics. I want to hear it all. Give me a like and a comment if you enjoyed the video. Be sure to subscribe for daily Pokemon TCG content. Check out my sponsors and other links in the description down below. And thank you so much for watching today. I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.